Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 51 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to be doing a rookie mock draft with landing spots. So I have a full 3-round NFL mock draft by Chad Reuter of NFL.com from the month of February here. And we're going to be using that as the basis for a Dynasty rookie mock draft as we get into rookie season. So here we are, late February, and it's time to start getting ready for the NFL draft. So scouting is kind of in full force right now, and we just finished our 4-episode series on startup rankings. So if you're interested in that, go check our the feed here and find those 4 shows. But from now on, it's going to be largely rookie content from here to the NFL draft as we try to get you ready to go for your leagues, your drafts. And so that's what today is helpful for. It's, hey, here's a mock draft. Let's see how things shake out and use that to formulate our opinions and as a good practice run for what to do for rookie drafts when they come up after the NFL draft. So before we do that, though, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. Give us a 5-star review and go find us on YouTube. Go subscribe. We're hoping to start video content at some point soon, so you don't want to miss that. So give us a subscription on YouTube and social media, Twitter, Facebook. You can find us on Twitter at Dynasty War Room. We'll follow you back, ask us questions, interact with us there. We're happy to answer questions and interact with people over on that site. And I think that's about everything that we need to cover. So with all that being said, let's jump on into today's episode. All right, so like we mentioned, it's a full 3-round mock draft from Chad Reuter, NFL.com. And I'm going to first read through the relevant landing spots for all of the offensive skill position players that would be eligible for this mock draft. Now, there are a number of fantasy assets that were not taken in the first 3 rounds of this mock draft. So that means we will not be selecting them in this mock draft because we don't know where they're going to be selected in the NFL draft. So I don't want to project a player that is going in the 4th or 5th round to be taken here in this full 2-round mock draft. So we're going to do 24 picks. It's just easier to stick with the players that were actually taken. And it's helpful because sometimes the players that we think are going to be, drafted on day 2 fall to day 3, and it throws things off. Troy Franklin is a good example of that from last year. A player who, was projected 2nd, 3rd round pick and then fell into the 4th round. So who knows how things are going to shake out, but that's why this is such a good exercise to kind of get into that mode of figuring out, okay, what do I do depending on these landing spots? Because landing spot is very important for your dynasty leagues. These are the teams that these players are going to be on for the next, 4 years at a minimum usually. And so we got to plan for how that's going to look. All right, so this mock draft, we'll just run through the picks. Number 1 overall was Cam Ward to the Tennessee Titans. The 2nd pick, Travis Hunter to the Browns. 3rd pick overall, Shedeur Sanders to the Giants. At the 6th pick, Ashton Genty went to the Raiders, running back from Boise State. Tight end Tyler Warren went 9th overall to the New Orleans Saints. At the 112, Tet McMillan, the first receiver off the board to the Dallas Cowboys. At 116, via trade, Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan, to the Broncos. At the 21st overall pick in the first round, Quinshon Judkins, running back from Ohio State, to the Pittsburgh Steelers. With pick 26, Luther Burden, wide receiver, going to the Rams. 1 pick later, at pick 27, Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State to the Eagles via trade. With the 31st overall pick, quarterback Jackson Dart. The New York Jets trade up into the back of the first round to select him. And then with the first pick of the 2nd round, Quinn Ewers, quarterback, going to the Cleveland Browns. 35th overall pick, Xavier Restrepo, wide receiver, to the Titans. 37th overall pick, Matthew Golden, wide receiver, to the Vegas Raiders. With the 44th overall pick, so we're roughly getting close to the middle of the second round here. Amarian Hampton, running back to the Dallas Cowboys. The 45th pick, Elijah Araro, tight end. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that last name correct. But he goes to the Colts with the 45th pick. And then pick 49, Tez Johnson, wide receiver to the Bengals. 52 overall, Jalen Milroe, quarterback to the Steelers. 62nd overall, Jack Beck, wide receiver to the Bills. One pick later, Jaden Blue, running back to the Kansas City Chiefs. That's kind of a surprise name that has not been projected to go on day 2, but that's a running back going to a high-powered offense. Isaiah Bond, wide receiver to the Patriots at the 69th overall pick. Mason Taylor, one pick later to the Jaguars, tight end. And then at pick 71, so one more pick after that, wide receiver Trey Harris to the Saints. And again, one more pick. We got a nice little run here, 4 picks in a row. Caleb Johnson, running back to the Chicago Bears at the 77th pick overall. And here we are into the early portion of the third round. Travion Henderson, running back from Ohio State to the Patriots. At the 78th overall pick, Savion Williams, wide receiver to the Cardinals. 81st pick is Harold Fannin Jr., tight end to the Bengals. With the 88th overall pick, Trevor Etienne to the Jaguars. It's a little family running back duo there. And a pick later, Dylan Gabriel, quarterback to the Dolphins. At the 90th overall pick, Kyle McCord to the Rams. And at the 91st pick, Jalen Royals, a nice little sleeper, wide receiver to the Ravens. And then at pick 97, Dylan Sampson to the Minnesota Vikings. He's a running back out of Tennessee. And with the final pick in terms of fantasy relevant players, with the 98th overall pick, Jalen Lane, a receiver to the Miami Dolphins. So I just threw a lot of names at you, but all of those guys, that's the player pool for this draft. Just to give you an idea of where all these players went, how everything shook out in the draft. And with all of that being said, let's move on into our rookie mock draft based on those landing spots. Now, at the 101, Ashton Genty, running back, Boise State, he goes to the Raiders in this mock draft with the 6th overall pick. And that's about as good as you can expect in terms of draft capital for Ashton Genty. I do not see a world where he goes any higher than 6th overall, but the fit does make a lot of sense. The Raiders do certainly need a running back. Zamir White was not it. We saw just a cycle of running backs go through Vegas last year, none of them very good, and it's a struggling offense. So I think that this makes sense. Now, you could argue that a team that has as many needs as the Raiders taking a running back in the first round, maybe not the best use of resources, and I think there certainly is something to be said about that. However, if Ashton Genty is as good of a player as he seems to be, then it's hard to knock it because he's going to be the clear 3-down workhorse running back. You pair him with Brock Bowers in that offense, and in this draft, the Raiders end up adding Matthew Golden, a wide receiver, in the second round. So given those additions, you probably would assume that the Raiders added a quarterback in free agency or via trade or something via the veteran quarterback market instead of rookie. So just maybe something to keep in the back of our minds here. But Ashton Genty, the clear-cut number 1 overall pick in this rookie mock draft, I think he's the consensus number 1 everywhere you look. There's really not a whole lot to say about him. He's that good. He will be the clear number 1 as long as he goes somewhere in the first round on draft night. Now, at the 2nd overall pick, I'm going to go with Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. So he's another running back. He went to the Steelers in the first round. And we talked on the last rookie mock episode where we had a second running back sneak into the first round. I believe in that draft it was Caleb Johnson, I believe. Maybe Amarian Hampton as well. But it's passing on Judkins where he would end up being the clear running back 1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He'd be taking over the Najee Harris role, who is a free agent. I'm not that concerned about Warren. he'll steal some of the pass catching work, but I think that is to be expected. But I think you could almost think of it as a 1-for-1 type of replacement for Najee Harris. Just you're getting the younger player, a little bit more explosive, and first-round running backs in Dynasty, that's a highly valuable asset. And given where Ted McMillan fell in this draft to the Dallas Cowboys, I think that certainly plays into the decision here to go with Judkins instead. Certainly as a prospect, just on the surface, Ted McMillan is currently my 102, but when McMillan, if he were to fall to somewhere like Dallas, where certainly a nice offensive situation, but it certainly could be a lot better because McMillan would never, ever, ever be the number one receiver on that team. CeeDee Lamb will be the Cowboys' number one receiver for as long as he remains on that roster, and that's not good news for Ted McMillan's fantasy value. So I think that's why I'm more willing to take the running back in Judkins and just bump McMillan down the list here a little bit as we get to him in just a minute. At the 103, I'm going to go with Amari Hampton. He went to the Dallas Cowboys in the early part of the second round, 44th pick overall. And Hampton is more of a true 3-down workhorse back, I think, compared to Judkins. And so I think that this would create a pretty interesting conversation post-draft night, should it be a situation where Judkins is drafted ahead of Hampton and in the first round. But both of these running backs are sort of viewed in that consensus top 5, top 6 group. And the landing spot is outstanding for Amari Hampton. And I think for that reason, he's the clear 103 in this draft to me. And there's even a conversation to be had about whether he would go second. I think it's just the draft capital. Being a first-round pick as a running back, I think is enough to put Judkins ahead of Hampton, because I don't think the talent difference is that great. I think they're pretty similar. Hampton may be a little bit more reliable as a pass catcher, but I do still like Judkins a lot as well. So a little run on running backs to start this mock draft with Genty at 1, Judkins 2, Hampton 3, who goes to the Cowboys in the second round. At the 104, I'm going to go with Ted McMillan. So we mentioned him. He's been the clear number 2 player kind of across the board, no matter where you look throughout draft season so far. And I still think he's the clear wide receiver 1, but the landing spot for fantasy is not as good going to Dallas. So this might be a very good real-life selection to pair him up with CeeDee Lamb and then Amari Hampton in the second round. But for dynasty value, excuse me, there are better places to be than the number 2 in Dallas. So for those reasons, I have McMillan falling to number 4, and he goes, again, to Dallas. At the 105, I'm going to go with Cam Ward. So taken by the Titans at the 101, and I think that Cam Ward offers enough as a rusher to justify the selection. I think he's there are some similarities to Caleb Williams in terms of his ability to extend plays, and he runs around a bit and avoids pressure, looks for something downfield. He doesn't necessarily look to take off and run, so there's some elements of that, and I don't know if that necessarily is a great thing for the NFL. We haven't really seen Caleb Williams be able to make it work as well as he did in college yet. Granted, it's only been the 1 year, but still something to consider in the back of your head. And that's why I think Cam Ward, even though he is the first overall pick in this draft that we're using, I don't love the Titans' other offensive pieces, and I'm not in love with the prospect enough to bump him up my board. So I think this is a pretty good range, though, for him. I would expect that Cam Ward is going to be a top 3 pick in the NFL draft, whether or not he goes to Tennessee. Who knows? He could end up going 2 to Cleveland, 3 to the Giants. But I would expect one of those 3 teams, or at least one of those 3 draft slots for Cam Ward. And so I think that makes this early to mid portion of the first round in rookie drafts his sweet spot, somewhere in that 4 to 6 range. Just depending on how things shake out, he could even sneak up to 3 if the draft doesn't fall very well for other players, particularly the running backs. I think a lot of people right now are just hoping, fingers crossed, that we get a second or even a third first-round running back. That's, sometimes that's wishful thinking here to get that many running backs in today's NFL to go that early. But Cam Ward, still a nice enough prospect. He is my quarterback 1 in rookie rankings right now. And so for those reasons, I have him at the number 5 spot in this draft. With the next 2 picks, I'm going to shift over to the tight end position, and a bit of a hot take, but I have Colston Loveland right now as my 106 in this mock draft. He goes to the Broncos with the 16th pick via trade up, and then at 107, I have Tyler Warren to the Saints, who's going 109. So a top 10 pick in real life for Tyler Warren. I think that the consensus would be he will be higher than the 107. Should this be the case, and that he will likely be ahead of Loveland on a consensus basis. But to me, it's about situation. I do not like the Saints offense. I do not like that situation. They're in a very bad cap space situation, and they have a new coach. Quarterback play is not very good. Alvin Kamara is aging out at the running back spot. Chris Olave, good player, but he's had some concussion issues. I just don't think that it's a very appealing place to be. Whereas Denver, you're paired up with Sean Payton, who has made good use out of tight ends in the past with Jimmy Graham. We have the young, what looks like to be a very good quarterback in Bo Nix. And it's just a nicer overall system in my eyes at this point. And Colston Loveland, I think, is more of that receiver, He's a very good route runner. He gets open, and I think that's going to play in that offense. So for now, based on these landing spots, I have Colston Loveland going at the 106, Tyler Warren to the 107. Both very good players, really nice tight end prospects that I think will probably end up in the top 6 or 7 or so of tight end position rankings post-draft once we do, in fact, see those landing spots. And I think that there's an argument that both of these players could even end up in the 4 and 5 type of range in mock drafts, just because I think they're both that good of players. And the rest of this draft class, particularly at wide receiver, not as strong. And I don't know that we're going to get multiple top 15, top 20 picks at wide receiver. We're probably talking something more like this draft where we had McMillan go 12th overall and then Burden and Egbuka go in the mid to late 20s. So just something to keep in mind. Those tight ends are probably going to get pushed up, as they should, because of both how good they are as prospects and then how lackluster this draft class is at wide receiver. Speaking of wide receivers, I have a pair of receivers going next. At the 8th pick in this draft, I do have Luther Burden going to the Rams. And then at 109, I have Egbuka going to the Eagles, who traded up in this NFL.com draft. So to me, Burden going to the Rams is the clear Cooper Kupp replacement. Puka Nacua is going to be the number 1 receiver there. And I think everyone is hoping for fantasy purposes that Matthew Stafford remains in LA. I have a hard time seeing him being moved, but it seems like that's a possibility. It's on the table. But Burden would be a nice complement to Puka Nacua. He's a shifty slot guy. He's got some speed. He's not necessarily a big play red zone type of target, but he is somebody that can move the chains and I think would be utilized very well by Sean McVay should he end up with the Rams. Egbuka, to me, this would signal that there might be a receiver getting shipped out in the offseason, potentially A.J. Brown, because otherwise I really don't see why the Eagles would select another first-round receiver to go with Brown and Devonta Smith. Seems a bit like overkill to take your wide receiver 3 that early. But again, I guess it could be something where that's the plan and the draft class just isn't that great a receiver after this initial grouping, and the Eagles want to solidify things. As Super Bowl champs, they don't have as many needs as other teams, but again, just from a general process standpoint, I don't necessarily think that would be the way the Eagles would do things. So to me, I'm viewing this as Egbuka would probably step in and be the number 2 on this team if somebody were traded. And then if not, and the plan was for, for Brown to finish his contract out, for Smith to stay there. Then Igbokwe he would probably fall down my board a little bit because at least one or two spots, just because I don't like waiting around for wide receivers for more than a year, especially in a class like this where there's a lot of other talented running backs. There's a top 10 quarterback that we have not selected yet. So that's kind of my position there. It's an interesting draft selection by Chad Reuter, who did this mock draft himself. With the 10th pick in our rookie mock draft, I'm going to go with Shedeur Sanders. He goes to the Giants at the 103 in this mock draft, and certainly he could be taken higher in rookie mock drafts, but again, I don't know that I love him as a passer, and he doesn't run the ball enough to make him stand out in terms of a high floor type of player. At least with Cam Ward, I think you're getting a little bit more on the ground, maybe kind of, Bo Nix-esque, or, we've seen Justin Herbert have a couple years where he has kind of a 20 to 30 yards rushing per game. Didn't happen quite as much this year, but something where I think Ward is a little bit more stable and has a bigger arm, whereas Sanders maybe fits more of that dink and dunk, accurate type of passer. He's not a statue. He certainly, is agile. He can move around in the pocket, but he's not somebody that's going to take off and run and just rack up a bunch of yards on the ground. So I do like the situation. He'd be paired with Malik Neighbors. That certainly would be, a nice situation for any quarterback to fall into. So still definitely first round worthy. And I think you could make the case anywhere from, 7 to 11 for Sanders. But I think latter half of that range makes more sense. So I have him here at the 110. With the 111, I'm going to take Caleb Johnson he goes to the Chicago Bears in this mock, early part of the third round. So this, I think, having a third round player being taken in the first round of a startup is not always the easiest thing to do. But I do like Johnson a lot as a prospect. I think that this is something where he'd be going in and probably splitting time with DeAndre Swift in year one before taking over in year two in a Ben Johnson offense, a high-powered offense, in theory, with Caleb Johnson, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, etc. And so I like the situation a lot. And given that I also really like the prospect, I think this is a pretty good landing spot, place to be. I would be surprised if he makes it to the third round in the NFL draft. I think he's going to be he'll be a second round pick in my mind. I think he even has an outside shot at being one of those players that, could be taken near the 1-2 turn. So with these running backs, a lot of it is just going to come down to where they go in terms of both team and draft capital. But I like the landing spot. And if he goes early third round, I don't think that's necessarily the worst spot to be in either. That's still a pretty good, area if you're looking at running backs. So Caleb Johnson, the 111 in this mock. With the final pick in the first round, I'm going to go with Jackson Dart, quarterback. He goes to the Jets with the 31st overall pick. The Jets move up via trade in this mock draft to take him. And I think this makes sense. In fact, you could even make the argument that he could go a pick or two earlier, simply because he does have more of a rushing upside compared to Sanders, compared to some of these other quarterbacks that are not, really any of these quarterbacks in the draft. I mean, Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart are the two guys that can certainly run, and Dart has less questions about his arm, and then of course in this draft goes in the first round. So I think getting that extra year in the contract, that you're getting the commitment from the Jets by moving up, I think it's enough to take him here with your last pick in the first round. Because if he does hit, it's one of those things where he can be a very good fantasy asset because his floor will be high. Now, do I have doubts, questions about whether he has the ability to read a defense and, throw the ball to more than just his first read or take off? Yes. The Ole Miss offense is not exactly a very pro friendly offense. It's not, it's not a pro style offense or anything like that. So there definitely are some concerns, but I don't know that he is that much worse as a prospect compared to a Sanders or a Ward or any of the other quarterbacks that go in this draft. And so for those reasons, I have Dart being my 12th pick overall in this draft. With the 201, we're going to go back to running back and go with Travion Henderson. He goes to the Patriots in the 3rd round, and I think this is an interesting landing spot because he has some of the same traits that the running backs in New England already have in terms of pass catching and whatnot, but he could certainly take over this backfield and be the starter in year 1. Despite being a 3rd round pick, I think that Ramondre Stevenson is unreliable. Antonio Gibson is more of a change of pace pass catcher at this point in his career. And so Henderson, he has the juice. He has that speed and burst. And he was an elite prospect. He was somebody that's been known in dynasty communities for a long time. And with Drake May in this offense, that could be a much improved team in 2025. And so if you can get the starting running back there at the 1-2 turn here in a rookie draft, I think that's a very good value because Henderson is someone that I think will be drafted higher than this in the NFL draft. Again, similar to Johnson, I think you're talking more of a 2nd round type of player. And I will be surprised if he falls into the mid-3rd. With the 202, this is where I think things get really unpredictable, and you could go a lot of different ways given how some of the guys that we thought might be selected were not. So, for example, there's no Cam Skattebo, there's no Devin Neal, Tootin, Gordon, Giddens. There's a bunch of running backs that I thought would likely be selected in the 3rd round here, and they did not make the cut. So our 2nd round looks vastly different than I think what it actually will be. So I'll go a little bit more quickly through this 2nd round because, again, I don't know that it's as necessarily reliable compared to how the first 12 picks in this draft, or the first 13 even, with Travion Henderson kind of shook out. I think that for those players, it's a little bit more realistic. But to kick off the more unpredictable portion of this draft, at the 202, I went with Jaden Blue, running back out of Texas. He goes to the Chiefs at the back of the 2nd round, and this is simply a draft capital position and offense pick. This is not necessarily me picking Jaden Blue because I think he's a great prospect. I don't necessarily think of him as a player that would be in my top 8 or 9 or maybe even 10 running backs. So this is probably a reach. But again, it is a mock draft. Teams can do crazy things. We all remember when the Chiefs passed on Jonathan Taylor and instead took Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So who knows what'll happen? But Jaden Blue, for a player that could end up being a starter on the Chiefs offense, I think that 202 is a fine place to do that. With the 3rd pick in the 2nd round, I'm going to make the plunge with Travis Hunter, who goes 2nd overall to the Browns. Now, Hunter is probably one of the most difficult players to handle right now in terms of how you think of him as a draft prospect, because I think everyone sees him as either the best or 2nd best wide receiver in this draft class, whether it's him or McMillan. You can argue about that, but the big worry is that we don't actually know if he's going to play wide receiver in the NFL. And if he does, is it going to be, here's a small package, or here's, 50% of snaps, or what's that going to look like? And can you take a part-time wide receiver in the 1st round of a dynasty rookie draft? Probably not. I just don't think that's going to return enough volume. And so it was announced that he is attending the combine as a corner. So that's not great. We'll see how he is announced on draft night and kind of the situation for wherever he goes. Now, I certainly think that he could be, an elite player and probably the top wide receiver, whether he were to go to the Browns or the Titans or a number of those teams in the top 5, top 10. But given the uncertainty, I'm looking at him more like an early 2nd round pick, just so you're not taking that big of a risk with your 1st rounder. But I think if you have an early 2nd rounder, I think that makes it a little bit more palatable to take that chance on Travis Hunter. At the 204, I'm going to go with Matthew Golden, Texas wide receiver. He has had a nice little rise up the ranks over the past month or two and is now being talked about as somebody that could even sneak into the first round. Here he goes to the Raiders with an early pick in the second round, and I think that makes him certainly a nice little selection here at the 204. So again, we don't know what the quarterback situation is in this pretend world with the Raiders, given that they went with Ashton Genty in the first round, but presumably they have some sort of veteran option worked out if they don't take one in the first 2 rounds here. So Golden would have a chance to step into that offense and start out as at least the number 2. There's Jacoby Myers. Obviously, Brock Bowers is going to be kind of the clear-cut number 1, but then it's going to be Myers and then Golden at the wide receiver spots. So room for Matthew Golden to take hold in that offense and become a long-term starter. At the 205, I'm going to go with Dylan Sampson. He goes to the Vikings at the end of the 3rd round, running back out of Tennessee. He is more of a speed, shifty. He can catch the ball. He's not like a power back. He's not somebody that's necessarily going to be a workhorse, but I think he could be a very electric portion of a committee in Minnesota. So it will be something that we keep an eye on about if Aaron Jones returns to Minnesota or not. But I think regardless of whether he does, the Vikings are going to draft a running back at some point in the middle rounds. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And to get, obviously this portion of the rookie drafts, you're going to be looking at the running backs because I think there will be a number of those players that will be valuable picks in the early and middle portions of the second round. And so Dylan Sampson, one of those players, he fits in, and he goes here at the 205. With the 206, I went with Quinn Ewers, quarterback out of Texas. He went with the first pick in the second round to the Browns. And so to me, that indicates he's going to be the starting quarterback. And whether it takes him a few weeks or the entire season to finally take over that role, depending on if they bring in a veteran or not. You could have Travis Hunter out there, given that's how this mock draft went. Jerry Jeudy is there. So it's something where it makes sense, right? The Browns, if they don't feel like they love Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, this taking a guy at the beginning of the second round is their fallback option should they still want to take a rookie. Quinn Ewers was a very highly touted prospect and was a solid player in college. I think that we were all wishing he would be, was a little bit more polished. I don't necessarily love him as a prospect. He doesn't have a very high rushing floor. Struggled at times, especially against elite defenses. But he had a nice college football playoff last year. We all remember that Washington game. And he's had, back-to-back solid seasons on a very good Texas squad, which has produced some pretty good NFL prospects and has been loaded with receivers. So who knows? I don't necessarily love the player at this point, but given where he goes in this draft and kind of the lack of other good options, Ewers goes at the 206. 207, I went with Xavier Restrepo, wide receiver from Miami. He went to the Titans with the 35th overall selection, and this is something where he's going to be Cam Ward's new best friend. Now, I don't think he's going to be a wide receiver 1, but could he settle in as a wide receiver 2? It's possible. I think this is a bit of a reach. Restrepo is not somebody that I think of as necessarily a early second round type of player, but that's what Tennessee does in this draft, and it's something where you like the idea of him forming a connection with Cam Ward, and if things work out, you could have a very nice little pairing. So 207 for Restrepo. At the 208, I went with Harold Fannin Jr., tight end out of Bowling Green, who just lit the world on fire on the stat sheet. Really, really good college player and a very good receiving option. He goes to the Bengals, who could absolutely use a tight end. Remains to be seen what happens with Mike Gesicki, who had a solid year. They also drafted Eric All, but he suffered another big injury, so it's something where you could certainly see the Bengals taking another tight end in a draft that has a lot of good tight ends. And so they take him here at the end of the later portion of the third round. There are a bunch of tight ends that were taken in this mock draft. Nobody else makes this list for me, but that certainly could change. I mean, this is a very strong tight end class. And so if you have picks in the back of the second, early third, I think that could be a good area of this draft to take a shot on one of those guys, whether it's a Fannin or a Mason Taylor or Arroyo. There's going to be a lot of tight ends that go on day 2, and certainly some sleeper value in fantasy. At the 209, I went with Jalen Milroe, and he went to the Steelers in the second round, which I think is fine. I think that's probably the general range he will go, but I just don't love the prospect, right? I really, really worry about him as a passer. We saw him just time after time struggle against the blitz, struggle to throw the ball. Now, he's an elite runner, very good running quarterback, and so from that sense, if he hits in fantasy, he could be great. I mean, we're talking one of those players that you are aiming for, right? You really want that type of player that's going to run for 50, 60, 70 yards a game on top of whatever passing yardage and production they're going to give you. So Jalen Milroe, I don't know if the Steelers would be a team that would necessarily be a good fit. I would imagine that they would be more inclined to just re-sign Justin Fields, but anything is possible. You could always double up and go Fields and Milroe, and they could probably run a similar offense. But in the back of the second round in a dynasty draft in a Superflex league, I think that makes a lot of sense. So 209 for Jalen Milroe. At the 210, almost just because of necessity, given the fact that he's the last running back here that went in this draft, I'm going to go with Trevor Etienne. He went to the Jaguars in the end of the third round, and I don't think this is a good pick for the Jaguars. I think this is a reach. I think this is maybe the mock draft writer just trying to have some fun with pairing up the ETN brothers. But it's just going to be a rotation of, I think, mid players if you add Trevor Etienne to the existing Jaguars backfield. But again, third round running back compared to some of the other players here on the board, I think this is about the spot where you would do that. So Trevor Etienne going at the 210. At the 211, I'm going to go with Trey Harris, wide receiver who goes here to the New Orleans Saints with the 71st overall pick. And Trey Harris is a pretty solid prospect. I like him. I think that he will potentially end up in the second round of the NFL draft. I don't know that he will fall to the third. But the Saints do have room for another player on offense besides Chris Olave in the passing game. So there's some injury concerns across that entire wide receiver room in New Orleans. So I think that creates the window of opportunity for somebody like Trey Harris, who comes out of Ole Miss, bigger body guy, physical receiver, had some really good stats as in his final season here with Jackson Dart. And Trey Harris to the Saints, I think is a good fit. And at this point in the draft, to get somebody who I think is a good prospect and has a good landing spot, I think makes for a very fine 211 selection. And with the final pick in this draft, I'm going to go with Jack Beck, wide receiver to the Buffalo Bills. He goes with the 62nd overall pick in this draft, and he's a fine prospect. I think he's somebody that is more destined to be just one of those consistent wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 players on the team. But given that he is a second-round selection with Josh Allen, with a high-powered offense that certainly could use somebody to step up on the outside, I think this is absolutely worth the shot, given kind of the hit rates in general in this range of the draft are not that great. So I'll take him, Jack Beck, here at the 212, and that'll round it out. Now, if I had to go one more pick, I do have a 301. That would be Jalen Royals, wide receiver from Utah State. He goes to the Baltimore Ravens at the end of the third round. A nice little sleeper selection. He has some nice, just he's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got some of those numbers that you look for in terms of metrics that we'll get into more over the next couple months. But that's it. Again, no Scattaboo, no Devin Neal. There's a number of players that I think will actually end up in the second round that were not taken in this mock draft from NFL.com. So I did not focus on those players. There's Eric Eomanor. There's Jaden Higgins at wide receiver. We touched on Scattaboo, Neal, Tootin, Gordon, a whole bunch of guys. So take all this with the second round with a grain of salt here. We're probably doing this exercise more for the first round. And just to run through that one more time here before we sign off, our mock draft results with the first 12 picks: Ashton Jeanty, number 1. He went to the Raiders at the 6th overall pick. Quinshon Judkins with the 102. He went in the first round to the Steelers. Amarian Hampton at the 103 went to the Cowboys in the second round. Tet McMillan with the 104. He went to the Cowboys in the first round. Cam Ward at the 105 went to Tennessee with the first overall pick. Colston Loveland at the 106 went to the Broncos in the first round. Tyler Warren at the 107, who went to the Saints in the first round. Luther Burden at the 108, who went to the LA Rams in the back of the first round. Emeka Egbuka at the 109, who went to the Eagles in the first round. Shedeur Sanders at the 110, who went with the third overall pick to the Giants. The 111 is Caleb Johnson, who went in the early portion of the third round to the Chicago Bears. And with the 112, Jackson Dart, who went to the Jets via trade-up at the back of the first round. And then Travion Henderson was our first pick of the second, who went in the third to the Patriots. So there you have it. There's our mock draft. We'll do a little bit more rookie scouting and focus more on just breaking down these players moving forward in terms of, where we see these guys going and how we would actually rank them as opposed to doing these mock drafts. But I think it is kind of a fun exercise to do, and just makes you think a little bit about what you would do should things happen in a way that maybe don't happen the way you would expect come NFL draft. So check back next week. We'll get into the NFL Combine and talk about that. So again, this is the Dynasty War Room podcast. My name is Andrew Valancourt, and we will talk to you all next week.